This might be the first time in the modern era a single studio has released 3 games in 1 year. That is a very tall task for any studio of any size to undertake. The Outer Worlds 2 is the last of Obsidian's 3 games in 1 year and a standalone sequel to The Outer Worlds, set in a new system that's still ruled by mega corporations that have somehow gotten even more mega, with new factions and almost a political drama for you to get invested in with the same satire and dark humor you'd remember. While I enjoyed quite a lot of this sequel from Obsidian, especially the role-playing elements as well, there's a much tighter combat system here than in The Outer Worlds 1, but however, I do think the crack in Obsidian's game design, especially their open zone structure, is starting to show. I'm not entirely sure I like it.
You're a legend.
Oh, now that is genius. Can't you get anything right?
So as always, let me know any questions you have about the game in the comments down below and I'll try and get back to you.
Well, what are we waiting for?
I did play mostly on my RTX 4090 machine and my ROG Xbox Ally X. Starting with the 4090, this performs basically how you would expect an Unreal Engine 5 game to perform, but leaning mostly on the good side. It's not that bad. I was hitting between 50 and 60 FPS without frame generation and more with it. Weirdly, just like Avowed, there is a ray tracing option, but it is just a tick box, and I could not tell you what it actually does. The game looks exactly the same to me with and without it, but when you do turn it on, there is a couple of like weird shadow glitches, and the shadows do look a little bit blurry sometimes, so I ended up playing it mostly with it off. But all of the super sampling options, DLS, AMD, etc. are all here. And on the Xbox Ally X, I was hitting between 45 and 55 frames at 1080 on the performance 17 watt mode, which is basically how you want to play anything on these handhelds in my experience with the original ROG Ally. So it's definitely 100% playable on that handheld, and I do enjoy the handheld experience. It does really help me get through these reviews in a timely manner when I've got a lot of other things on. Other than that ray tracing bug, I didn't have a lot of bugs, except for 2 pretty crucial ones. The first one was the moon man that talks to you in the menu literally spoiled a quest for me that I wasn't even actually engaging with yet, which was kind of annoying. I do know other reviewers that had some quests that they couldn't complete, but the worst bug that I actually had, which is quite bad, is that for some reason I can only see one character's save file data. Now, despite there being 100 save files when you go to load game, and I have created multiple characters, the load game section only shows the last character that I played as, and there is no way to switch between like the character option that's showing this load screen. I've been taking my multiple character save files out of the save location on my PC and then putting them back in when I want to play one of the other characters. So that's definitely annoying and something to be aware of. Hopefully they do fix that, but otherwise no real major gameplay bugs that I personally experienced. I know Obsidian are enamored with this open zone world design where you just have basically small regions that you can freely explore and then move on to the next one. But I'm kind of at the point now where I just don't think this works, at least as well as they think it does. It makes this style of game feel like a chore when you arrive at a new planet and every NPC is standing around waiting for you to interact with them and then dump this brand new problem on you. It removes the freedom you get in an open world. Like, sometimes I don't want to take on a whole new area and a bunch of new quests. I just want to enjoy the world that I'm in, but The Outer Worlds 2 shoves you out of the ship door on a new planet and forces that exploration and content down your throat without it feeling natural or earned in some regards. This was also the same with Avowed and The Outer Worlds 1 for that matter, where you're immediately bombarded with new NPCs, new quests, new this, new that, and as someone that plays a lot of these open world games, I find it quite overwhelming and in some regards unfun when I've already done this exact loop 4 times and now I've got to do it again on a brand new planet. Because there is never any overlap in the characters you meet on these planets or interact with, you're constantly getting new NPCs, new lore drops, new faction conflicts that for some reason this random new arrival, being you, always has to solve these problems, and sometimes it feels like you're the only adult in the room who decides who gets to play on the Xbox now.
No, please, wait. I need you.
I don't inherently have a problem with these smaller zone designs. I actually kind of liked them in the Outer Worlds. I didn't like them in Avowed. I think they work generally for a sci-fi game where you're exploring planets, but I did find it fatiguing to just keep doing this same loop, especially when every zone suffers the same problem as the Outer Worlds and Avowed in that they are very static. NPCs are just standing around waiting for you to interact with them. There are no random encounters or dynamic events that could occur that leaves the world feeling lifeless at times. And if you are going to do these smaller zones and smaller regions to explore, why not do something more complex with them? I feel like having a tighter exploration area and space allows you to make something a bit more dynamic and a bit more engaging rather than just this static environment that they give you. But at least here, unlike Avowed, there is stealing and a crime system, and plus you can get a bounty on your head and get hunted, or you can hunt other bounties, which I did appreciate and does give it a bit more depth and complexity to the overall world space, and this was something that was sorely lacking in Avowed. But what I would really like is more of a connective tissue between these planets, rather than always being a brand new set of NPCs, new factions, and new lore on every planet. It's just a little odd that despite this being a thriving galaxy, the only characters that travel to other planets are you and your crew. There's no one else that does this, and it just is a bit strange when you have to redo that learning process on every single planet every single time. When I wasn't overwhelmed by this, each region has a unique vibe and visual flair that is quite exciting to engage with on that front. Your exploration is constantly rewarded with interesting handcrafted locations with some environmental storytelling or something to discover, like a unique weapon or armor or an interesting little tidbit of quest lore. This is also exemplified by how your skill choices can affect your discovery and the quality of your exploration. I'll get into this a little bit more later, but I really enjoyed that your skills weren't just appearing in dialogue or say combat focus like guns, right? You'll often come across objects in the world that you can interact with different options based on your skills, or no options if you don't have the right skill to engage with it. This is great for replayability, but it also immediately made me want to start a second character with different traits, skills, perks, etc. But it did feel like that exploration was rewarded, and the choices that I made based on my role playing was also rewarded because of how I chose to put my character together. Another element that's new in the Outer Worlds 2 that does add to the exploration is an additional radio. There are multiple radio stations here with music that is very familiar if you have played another franchise that Obsidian has worked on, being Fallout. Basically, all the songs here are the exact same genres of music that Fallout does with their radio, except they are custom here, mostly poking fun at capitalism and other themes that I did enjoy. There isn't enough diversity in the songs or the genres here as a way you want to have this on across your entire 40 hours, but for a couple of hours here and there, it is quite fun to engage with. But man, goddamn, this game just wants to be Fallout. Like the radio, the exact genres that the music has, just the way the world is structured. It really does feel like Obsidian are just going to go and work on Fallout now, and this was like their testing ground in a lot of the way this game is set up, especially when it comes to combat.
Guns cocked and loaded. Just give the signal.
Back in business.
Get influences!
Now, combat overall here is very solid. The gunplay is fantastic. Enemy reactivity is great as they do react to your hits, and depending on the companions you have and some of your skills, you can stun them, you can bleed them, you can knock them down onto the ground. There is a lot of weapon variety as well as build variety, and whether you wanted to go a stealth route, a melee route, a ranged weapon route, or even use some of those non-physical types of damage like those elemental effects, there's plenty of options and diversity in terms of how you want to create your combat playstyle, which is great for replayability as well. The downside to this is that enemy diversity is kind of lacking. You've seen all the enemies by the second and third planet. It doesn't really change much beyond that point. There also is a lot of the same creatures from the first game as well, which is fine, nothing wrong there. It's just disappointing that the depth of the enemy variety and the diversity in how you engage with these combat encounters isn't very deep, especially when it was one of the best things that I enjoyed about Avowed was that diversity in the enemies and their archetypes, and you can tackle those situations different ways because there were healers and shield users, etc. But here it's very rare that you'll tackle any of these combat encounters differently beyond the fact you'll just hide behind cover and shoot the bad guys. There is a little healing bot that appears very, very rarely, and that forces you to think about those combat encounters differently because you want to obviously focus on the healing bot and then take out the enemies, but that doesn't happen very often. But what does happen very often is getting new gear. Now, this did take a little while to get going in the first planet especially. You aren't given a lot of fun tools in terms of weapon variety and complexity, but this will happen across the playthrough in that there are a lot of diversity in the weapon types you'll use, a lot of unique weapons that have unique effects as well that I did really enjoy playing around with them, both from a melee perspective and a range perspective, and just tinkering with the weapons I was constantly using and finding what really works and feels good. Enemies do have weaknesses and resistances to certain damage types, which does force you to switch up your weapons a couple of times here and there, depending on what you're fighting, whether you're fighting mechs or humans, etc., which is nice and a bit of variety. And the companions, which we'll touch on a bit more depth later, do have abilities that can interact with the enemies and yourself to add a bit more depth to the combat system other than just how you are engaging with the gunplay. But there is also the gadgets you can use in combat, like in the first game there was that time dilation, that slowdown effect. Again, very Fallout. But here there are new gadgets like a shield and a couple of other ones as well that you can use inside and outside of combat to give you sort of an ability in terms of sci-fi-ness that you can use in combat depending on your play style. But your enjoyment of the combat system and the game in general really hinges on the progression of your character. Backgrounds, traits, skills, perks, and flaws. There's a lot of RPG elements here to really break down and think about. Backgrounds is a decision that you'll make at the very start of the game, which is mostly flavor text around what your character was doing before the events of the game. Traits, you'll get to pick one trait, or you can pick two traits, but then you have to take a negative trait as well. And then you've got your skills, which is just your general. As you level up, you'll get 2 skill points. You'll be able to put them into the skills. And then every second level, you'll get a perk point, which you'll then be able to put into the various perks. There's like over 80 of them, plus some hidden ones as well. Which perks are unlocked are dependent on your skill levels for the various skills. And then as you're playing, you'll get options to take flaws. Now, flaws are returning from Outer Worlds 1, which is a fantastic system that I wish more games did, where depending on your play style and things that you interact with and do, the game will give you the option to take a flaw. Flaws will give you a positive effect as well as a negative effect. Some of these are game-changing in a positive or often a negative way. And then some of them are just fun to change. Like one of the favorite ones that I picked was foot and mouth syndrome, because I skip a lot of the dialogue options that are just the general ones. I got option to this flaw that means that I have a limited amount of time to select a dialogue option. However, the benefit is that I just across the board gain a flat 15% increase to my experience. So I did take that and actually made the conversations a lot more engaging because I had to pay attention to pick a dialogue option and read all the different options fast enough so that it didn't auto pick an option for me as it does if that timer runs out. But all these different elements that we mentioned really coalesce into quite a deep role-playing experience for the character that you are actually playing. Your background choice, traits, skills, perks, and even flaws will come up in dialogue options, as well as object checks, as there is a lot of objects you can interact with that will have different interactables depending on the decisions you make. The main character that I played was a lucky dude that didn't really have a lot of skill in terms of science or medical, etc., but was just quite lucky and often got away with, say, mashing buttons on a keyboard or something to, figure out the solution to a puzzle, which is just a fun interaction that you can do because of his traits. But that's what elevates that character experience and that roleplay expression of how you're playing your character. My second character is a bit of a borderline evil commander that is very straight shooter and leans into that aspect. And it's just interesting to see the different dialogue options and how that plays out, as well as you'll come across objects on one playthrough that you just simply can't interact with because you don't have the skills or the perks, etc., required to pass those checks. Or even one of my favorite things about the dialogue here is that the dialogue options that aren't unlocked for you, they will show. So you'll be able to know that, I could have said something if I had a certain speech level, a certain hack level, a certain whatever in this conversation, but because I don't have the skill, I can't actually select that option. And it's just nice to know that those options are there, and it does push you to want to play the game again and go a different route, which is just absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed that aspect of the game. And it's elevated and hindered a little bit by the companions. you have 6 companions, each from the different factions that you'll interact with throughout the game. Niles is the first companion, and he's absolutely the most fleshed out and the most interesting of them all, as you get to shape him a little bit based on the dialogue interactions that you have with him. And as with all the companions, they will remember certain things that you say, but with Niles especially, that is really exemplified by the way that he interacts with you and the other characters as you go on this journey together.
Wouldn't have expected you to see it that way, given all your talk of trusting no one and looking out for myself.
Really feels like a companion to your character, not just someone you met along the journey and, you know, pulled with you. I really like the interactivity between Niles and the commander and how they are both linked to the main story that is occurring throughout the game and how you can shape Niles throughout that journey. One thing to note is it is kind of weird that all of the companions have these really weird and ugly helmets, and the only way you can see their faces is you go into the settings and turn their helmets off. Don't really understand this just from a enjoyment perspective. Like, why would I want to see a companion wearing like a plastic bag or something on their head, right? Like, I kind of want to see their face, especially when, you know, they have such an interesting design and you want to be, you know, connect with that companion, not just look at a paper bag for, you know, X amount of hours when you're doing the companion quest. Speaking of those quests, completing those quests will net you their mod kits, which allow you to upgrade their weapons and armor. And otherwise, the companions do kind of level with you. As you hit certain level milestones, you'll be able to pick minor perks between a left or a right option that will then push the companions a little bit stronger, give them slightly more effects, or just change the way that you interact with them in the game world. There is some disappointment here in the companion quests themselves. I found that they were a little samey. Basically, it's, you know, insert companion here, and then they have a falling out with someone from their past, and you'll then help them reconnect with that person, and then they'll get, you know, that advanced mod kit to then give them the best weapons and armor, etc. It's just a little disappointing that there wasn't more happening here. Some of them are okay. One of them is literally you just go to a location and pick up their mod kit, which is a little disappointing. But these are the core elements of the game and the core characters you're going to interact with. They should have much more of an extended and fleshed out companion quest line that adds to the experience. There isn't really a Pavati level quest line here in terms of the companions, which is unfortunate, especially when there are a lot of elements to the roleplay and the dialogue that is very, very strong.
Who is in charge of the mission? And how did this happen? What? We're recording. Make sure we edit that out.
You are the Hotshot Earth Directive Commander. After your secret mission goes sideways, you end up in cryostasis for 9 years, only to reappear in the Arcadia system that's still feeling the effects of that mission and the betrayal of one of your own. The first half of the story, you'll follow this thread, listening to audio logs and gathering information to progress from planet to planet until the shoe drops and now you've got to save the world. The main story here, I really wasn't a fan of at all. The villain, in quotation marks, because they're just completely non-existent. There is no villain or really strong thread to pull. It's either just audio logs or a character that you virtually never interact with, and you're just told that they're bad because they made a decision that's never really explained to you beyond the fact that they betrayed you. Why exactly they did, it's very unclear. Specifically, they tell you that, oh, it's because of this, but it's never really fleshed out in a way that makes sense. Really, the story and the character development and enjoyment comes from these smaller stories that happen along the journey with those 6 companions and each planet's main story. So each of those planets you interact with, they all have their own main story in quotation marks that you'll solve on your journey. As you arrive on that planet, you know, there's a faction conflict or something, you'll then progress through that, complete that arc on that planet, and then go to that next planet. That planetary conflict and deciding what happens on those planets is the best roleplay parts of the game, as you make a decision around which faction you're going to align with, what decisions you're going to make there. The downside to that is that when you get to that final payoff at the very end, it really doesn't lead you anywhere particularly worthwhile. You get a slideshow around the decisions you made, both with your companions and on those planets. And the game just kind of ends, like you make a decision and then the game's over and, you know, that's it. And it's a little disappointing that you spend the game making all these decisions, really role-playing a certain aspect of your character, only to it to just end quite abruptly. But that's not to say the journey wasn't worthwhile, and I do think that that's some of the strongest parts about the Outer Worlds 2, is that role-playing journey you go on, the decisions you make. The game is very well written, well voice acted, and there's plenty of options to choose depending on the character direction you want to take the commander. With all that being said, The Outer Worlds 2 is a game that is definitely better enjoyed at a slower pace than you're forced to for a review period. And I do think that some of my criticisms of having to go through these worlds and the way that you play a game in a review setting does lead me to be a little bit more disappointed with some of that content, as it's definitely a problem with reviewing games in such a short window. You get stuck in a bit of a loop of having to push through that content, and I do think to some regards is the problems that I have with the world structure and in some of these discussions as well is because, you know, I don't get the time to sit back and really enjoy the experience. And The Outer Worlds 2 is a game that I actually do plan to play again at a much slower pace and make that second character that I have go all the way to the end and just see how the story plays out differently, because I did enjoy the roleplay, I did enjoy the progression, I did enjoy the combat. There's a lot to like here, despite a couple of things that I didn't like. But if you liked The Outer Worlds 1, Avowed, or Obsidian's game design overall, you will enjoy this game, and I do think it's worth a purchase. However, that being said, there is caveats to think of when you're deciding if this game is right for you that I did mention in this review. There's a lot of those hardcore RPG mechanics, that forced planetary exploration, and a pretty average main story that may turn you off the experience, but if you can stomach all of that, there's a lot of fun to be had in The Outer Worlds 2 if you enjoy these style of RPGs. But let me know any questions you have in the comments down below. You're going to pick up Outer Worlds 2. I will have plenty of content coming out when the game does actually launch, so if you want to know how to make the best characters, best guides, etc., all that's going to be there. But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.